The hidden power of grapes. What happens to your body when you eat them? What if one of the sweetest fruits on earth is also carrying a surprisingly sophisticated system of protection inside every single grape? Not a supplement, not a laboratory-made capsule, not an expensive superfood imported from the other side of the world. Just a grape, a small fruit that can be green, red, black, purple, or almost golden. A fruit that has been cultivated by human beings for thousands of years. A fruit that appears simple on the outside, yet contains a remarkable combination of water, natural sugars, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and hundreds of plant compounds. But here is where the story becomes much more interesting. When you eat grapes, you are not simply eating something sweet. You are consuming a collection of molecules that plants developed for their own survival, pigments that protect against sunlight, compounds that help defend the fruit from environmental stress, and antioxidants that interact with biological processes inside the human body. And some of these compounds have become the subject of fascinating scientific research. So today, we're going much deeper than simply saying, grapes are healthy. We're going to explore what actually makes grapes interesting, what happens after you eat them, why the skin may be more important than you think, what scientists have discovered about compounds such as resveratrol and anthocyanins, how grapes may relate to cardiovascular health, digestion, metabolism, and the brain, and also where the popular claims about grapes go too far. Because understanding food is not about turning one fruit into a miracle. It's about understanding the remarkable complexity of creation. And perhaps, by the end of this journey, you will never look at a simple bunch of grapes quite the same way again. The first surprise. Grapes are mostly water. Let's begin with something surprisingly simple. A grape is largely water. That may sound unremarkable, but it matters. Water is fundamental to almost every process in the human body: blood circulation, temperature regulation, digestion, cellular reactions, and nutrient transport all depend on adequate hydration. When you eat fruit with a high water content, you're not replacing drinking water, but you're contributing to your overall fluid intake. And grapes combine this water with natural carbohydrates. That combination makes grapes an efficient source of quick energy. Their natural sugars, primarily glucose and fructose, can be absorbed and used by the body as fuel. This is one reason grapes can be particularly appealing before or after physical activity. But there is an important distinction. Natural sugar does not automatically make a food unhealthy. The food matrix matters. A whole grape comes with water, fiber, micronutrients, and plant compounds. It is very different from consuming the same amount of sugar in a highly processed drink. The body does not experience every source of carbohydrate in exactly the same nutritional context. And this is one of the first lessons grapes can teach us. Food is more than a single nutrient. It is a package. What makes grapes special? If you look at a grape under a microscope, you enter a completely different world. The color of the fruit is not simply decoration. Those deep purple, red, and blue shades come largely from compounds called anthocyanins. Anthocyanins belong to a larger family of plant compounds known as polyphenols. And grapes contain several different types of polyphenols. There are flavonoids, anthocyanins, flavanols, phenolic acids, and the famous compound that has attracted enormous scientific attention, resveratrol. These compounds are part of the plant's defense system. Plants cannot run away from intense sunlight. They cannot move into the shade when ultraviolet radiation becomes intense. They cannot take antibiotics when microorganisms attack. Instead, plants develop chemistry. Their tissues produce thousands of compounds that help them survive their environment. And some of these compounds happen to interact with human biology in fascinating ways. That doesn't mean plants were designed as medicine in a simplistic sense, but it does mean that the chemistry of plants is extraordinarily rich. and grapes are a particularly interesting example. Don't throw away the skin. If you normally eat grapes and immediately think only about the juicy interior, you're missing an important part of the story. The skin contains many of the fruit's polyphenolic compounds. This is especially relevant in darker grapes. Why? Because many of the pigments responsible for those deep colors are concentrated in the skin. Think about a purple grape. That intense color is essentially a visual clue that the fruit contains a rich mixture of plant pigments. The skin is also where we find resveratrol. Resveratrol is a naturally occurring polyphenol that plants can produce in response to environmental stress. It became famous because laboratory and observational research has explored its possible relationships with cellular stress responses, inflammation, vascular function, and metabolic pathways. But there is an important scientific caution here. The fact that resveratrol produces interesting effects in cells or animals does not automatically mean that eating grapes will reproduce those effects in humans. This distinction is essential. A laboratory experiment may use concentrations that are difficult to achieve through ordinary food consumption, and the body absorbs, transforms, and eliminates compounds. So when you hear that a particular compound does X, always ask, at what dose? In what model? In humans or in a laboratory? And was the amount obtained from normal food? This is the difference between science and hype. Grapes are fascinating without turning them into a miracle cure. Grapes and the heart. Now we come to one of the most interesting areas of grape research: cardiovascular health. Your cardiovascular system is constantly working. Your heart contracts thousands of times every day. Your blood vessels expand and contract. Your blood circulates through an enormous network of arteries and smaller vessels, and the inner lining of those vessels, called the endothelium, plays a crucial role in vascular function. The health of blood vessels depends on many factors: blood pressure, blood lipids, blood glucose, inflammation, oxidative stress, physical activity, smoking, sleep, body composition, and overall dietary pattern. No single fruit can control all of these variables, but grapes contain compounds that researchers have investigated in relation to some of these mechanisms. Polyphenols may influence oxidative processes and signaling pathways involved in vascular function. Some studies have examined grape-derived foods and their potential effects on markers associated with cardiovascular health. And grapes also fit naturally into a dietary pattern rich in fruits and vegetables. That larger pattern is important. Sometimes people search for one magical food, but the human body doesn't work that way. Health is cumulative. One healthy meal doesn't transform the body, and one unhealthy meal doesn't destroy it. What matters is the pattern repeated over months and years. A handful of grapes won't erase high blood pressure caused by an unhealthy lifestyle, but replacing a highly processed snack with whole fruit may be one small, practical step toward a better overall dietary pattern. And small steps matter because they accumulate. The antioxidant story is more complicated than you think. You've probably heard the word antioxidant thousands of times. But what does it actually mean? Inside your cells, oxygen is involved in countless chemical reactions. These reactions can generate reactive molecules. Your body has sophisticated antioxidant defense systems to keep these processes under control. This is normal biology. The problem arises when the balance between oxidative processes and protective systems becomes disrupted. This is often discussed under the concept of oxidative stress. Plant foods contain compounds that can interact with oxidative chemistry. Grapes contain many of these compounds, but there's a misconception worth correcting. Eating an antioxidant-rich food does not simply mean that antioxidants travel through your body like tiny soldiers, destroying every harmful molecule they encounter. Human biology is much more complicated. Many dietary polyphenols are extensively metabolized. Their metabolites may be biologically active. They may interact with cellular signaling pathways. They may influence gene expression, enzymes, or communication between cells. So the benefit of plant foods may not simply be about absorbing antioxidants. It may be about how their compounds interact with biological systems. And that is far more fascinating. The fruit isn't merely supplying a chemical. It's interacting with a living organism. Grapes and digestion. Now let's move to a system that often doesn't receive enough attention. The digestive system. A whole grape contains dietary fiber, although not an enormous amount compared with some other fruits. Fiber contributes to normal bowel function and becomes particularly important as part of a diet rich in plant foods. But something even more interesting is happening inside your gut. Your digestive tract is home to trillions of microorganisms. Together, they form what we commonly call the gut microbiome. These microorganisms interact with the food you eat, and plant compounds can become part of this interaction. Some polyphenols are not completely absorbed in the upper digestive tract. They can reach the colon, where microorganisms may transform them into other compounds. This means your gut microbes can participate in the metabolism of plant chemicals. In a sense, you're not digesting food alone. You're participating in an ecosystem. You eat a plant. The plant contains complex compounds. Your digestive system processes them. Your microbiome transforms some of them, and the resulting molecules can interact with your body. This is one of the most exciting areas of modern nutritional science. We are gradually discovering that food isn't simply fuel. It is information. Grapes and the brain. Now consider your brain. It is one of the most energy-demanding organs in your body. It requires a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients, and it is particularly sensitive to oxidative and inflammatory processes. This is why researchers have become interested in whether polyphenol-rich foods might influence aspects of brain health. Grape-derived products. Grape polyphenols and compounds such as resveratrol have been investigated in relation to cognitive function, vascular mechanisms, and cellular stress. Some research is promising, but again, we have to distinguish between possibility and proof. A promising laboratory mechanism is not the same thing as a clinically proven treatment, and grapes should never be presented as a cure for neurological disease. What we can say is that grapes contribute plant compounds to the diet, and research continues to investigate how these compounds interact with human physiology. The most powerful approach remains remarkably ordinary: a varied diet, regular movement, adequate sleep, healthy blood pressure, healthy metabolic function, and long-term care of the cardiovascular system. The brain is connected to the rest of the body. What protects the blood vessels can also matter to the brain. The color of a grape tells a story. Let's look again at grape color. Green grapes, red grapes, black grapes, purple grapes. Why so many colors? Because plants contain different pigments and combinations of compounds. Dark-colored grapes tend to contain more anthocyanins than green grapes. Anthocyanins are responsible for many red, purple, and blue colors in plants, and these compounds are among the polyphenols scientists study for their potential biological activity. But this doesn't mean green grapes are unhealthy. Not at all. Different varieties simply have different chemical profiles. Think of grapes as a family rather than a single food. Each variety has its own combination of sugars, acids, aroma compounds, pigments, and polyphenols. Some are intensely sweet, some are tart, some have thick skins, others are delicate, some are nearly black, others are pale green. Nature rarely produces identical copies. It creates variation, and that variation is part of what makes plant foods so interesting. What about the seeds? Here is another fascinating part of the grape. The seeds. Grape seeds contain compounds called proanthocyanins, which belong to the polyphenol family. Grapeseed extracts have been studied extensively for antioxidant and vascular-related effects. But again, we should distinguish between grapeseed extract supplements and simply eating grapes. They are not nutritionally equivalent. Supplements can contain concentrated amounts of specific compounds that would be difficult to obtain from normal food. This is why research on an extract should not automatically be interpreted as evidence about the whole fruit. Whole foods contain complex mixtures, and often that complexity is part of their value. Grapes and blood sugar. Now let's discuss something extremely important. Blood sugar. Because grapes taste sweet, many people immediately assume they must cause dangerous blood sugar spikes. The reality is more nuanced. Grapes contain naturally occurring sugars, so they do raise blood glucose to some degree, but the response depends on portion size, variety, ripeness, what else you're eating, and individual metabolism. Whole grapes also contain water and fiber, which affect how quickly the carbohydrates are consumed and absorbed compared with a concentrated, sugary beverage. However, this doesn't mean grapes are free food for everyone. People managing diabetes or blood glucose should consider portion size and their individual dietary plan. And there's another fascinating distinction. Whole grapes versus grape juice. Juice removes much of the physical structure of the fruit and makes it easier to consume a large amount quickly. You can drink the liquid from many grapes much faster than you can sit down and chew the same number of whole grapes. This is one reason whole fruit is generally a better everyday choice than fruit juice. The structure of food matters. How quickly you consume it matters, and how much you consume matters. Grapes and weight management. Can grapes help with weight management? Potentially, but not because grapes burn fat. They don't. No ordinary fruit magically switches on a fat-burning mechanism that overrides energy balance. But grapes can be part of a diet that supports healthy weight management. Why? Because whole fruit can provide sweetness and satisfaction without being as energy-dense as many processed desserts. Instead of reaching for a highly processed sweet snack, someone might choose a bowl of grapes. That substitution can matter, but portions still count. Grapes are relatively easy to overeat because they're small, sweet, and delicious. You can eat one, then another, and suddenly the bowl is empty. This is a good example of why healthy doesn't mean unlimited. A healthy food can still contribute substantial calories if eaten in large quantities. Balance is the key. Grapes and vitamin K. Grapes also contribute micronutrients. One of the vitamins present in grapes is vitamin K. Vitamin K is involved in normal blood clotting and bone metabolism. The amount obtained from a normal serving of grapes isn't enormous. But nutrition isn't always about obtaining everything from one food. Think of micronutrients as pieces of a much larger puzzle. You eat fruit, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, protein-rich foods, and each contributes different nutrients. This is why dietary diversity is so powerful. A single food can be nutritious, but variety gives the body access to a broader spectrum of nutrients and plant compounds. Grapes and potassium. Grapes also provide potassium. Potassium is an essential mineral involved in nerve signaling, muscle contraction, and fluid balance. The amount in grapes is modest compared with foods such as potatoes, beans, or bananas. But every contribution counts. And potassium becomes especially relevant when we talk about cardiovascular health. Diets rich in potassium-containing foods are generally associated with healthier blood pressure patterns. But once again, one serving of grapes isn't a blood pressure treatment. It's one small component of an overall diet. This theme keeps returning because it is one of the most important truths about nutrition. There is no single food that carries your health on its shoulders. Your body is an interconnected system. The ancient relationship between humans and grapes. Now let's step away from nutrition for a moment, because grapes aren't just food. They are part of human history. Grapevines have been cultivated for thousands of years. They have appeared in ancient agriculture, art, literature, religious traditions, and cultural practices. Humans have been drawn to grapes for an extraordinarily long time. Why? Because grapes offer something rare. They are sweet. They are refreshing. They can be eaten fresh. They can be dried into raisins. They can be transformed into other foods and beverages. And the grapevine itself can live and produce for many years under the right conditions. This relationship between humanity and the grapevine is ancient. Long before nutrition labels existed. Long before vitamin tablets. Long before laboratories could identify polyphenols. People were already cultivating vines. They didn't know the names of anthocyanins. They didn't know what resveratrol was. They didn't understand the microbiome, but they recognized the value of the fruit. Modern science is not replacing that ancient knowledge. It is adding another layer of understanding. Raisins, the same fruit, a different food. Now consider what happens when you remove most of the water. You get a raisin. The fruit sugars become concentrated. The calories become more concentrated too. This is why dried grapes should be treated differently from fresh grapes. A small handful of raisins can represent the sugar and calories of a much larger quantity of fresh grapes. That doesn't make raisins bad. They can be nutritious and convenient, but they are much easier to overconsume. And this illustrates something fundamental. Water changes the physical density of food. Fresh fruit and dried fruit can come from exactly the same plant, yet behave very differently in your diet. Why whole grapes beat the superfood myth? There is a temptation in modern nutrition to rank foods. This is the superfood. That food is inferior. This supplement is powerful. That fruit is magical. But real nutrition is less dramatic. Grapes don't need to be a miracle. They only need to be what they actually are. A nutritious whole fruit containing water, carbohydrates, fiber, vitamins, minerals, and a diverse collection of plant compounds. That is already impressive. And perhaps the healthiest way to think about grapes is not, will grapes cure something? But, how can grapes fit into a healthy pattern of eating? That question is much more useful. Who should be careful with grapes? Despite their nutritional value, grapes aren't perfect for every situation. People with diabetes may need to pay attention to portions and carbohydrate intake. People taking certain medications may have individual dietary considerations. And grapes are one of the foods that can pose a choking hazard to very young children, if not prepared appropriately. Also, people with certain gastrointestinal sensitivities may notice that large amounts of fruit can cause bloating or digestive discomfort. And there is another practical issue. Grapes can carry residues from agricultural treatments if they aren't properly handled. Washing fresh produce thoroughly under running water is a sensible habit. The point isn't to fear food, it's to treat food thoughtfully. The deeper lesson hidden inside a grape. Now let's return to that tiny fruit. Imagine holding one grape in your hand. It's small, almost insignificant, but inside it are layers of biological complexity. Water, sugars, fiber, organic acids, minerals, vitamins, pigments, polyphenols, aromatic compounds, and genetic instructions that built the entire fruit from sunlight, water, minerals, and carbon dioxide. Think about that. A grapevine takes energy from the sun. Its roots draw water and minerals from the earth. Its leaves capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Through photosynthesis, the plant converts light energy into chemical energy. Then, over time, the vine produces fruit. And inside that fruit is food. Something you can hold. Something you can taste. Something your body can use. We often call this nature. But if you slow down enough to look closely, nature stops looking simple. It becomes astonishingly intricate. The sweetness is not the whole story perhaps. That's the greatest misconception about grapes. We notice their sweetness first. But sweetness is only one part of their identity. The sweetness attracts us. The color catches our attention. The aroma creates anticipation. But beneath those obvious characteristics is an enormous biochemical system. And this is true not only of grapes. It's true of apples, pomegranates, berries, citrus, leafy greens, herbs, nuts, seeds. Every whole plant food carries a story written in chemistry. Modern nutrition is slowly learning how to read some of those stories. But we are still far from understanding everything. What happens when you make grapes part of your life? Not once. Not as a 7-day grape detox. Not as a miracle diet. But simply as part of a balanced lifestyle. You gain another source of plant diversity, another source of hydration, another source of micronutrients, another source of fiber, another source of polyphenols, and another alternative to highly processed foods. That may sound ordinary, but health is often built through ordinary things repeated consistently. A bowl of fruit, a walk after dinner, a glass of water, a good night's sleep, a meal prepared from simple ingredients. These actions rarely become viral. They don't promise overnight transformation, but the body responds to consistency. Day after day, month after month, year after year. So, how many grapes should you eat? There isn't one perfect number for everyone. A reasonable serving might be around a cup of whole grapes. But individual needs vary depending on total diet, energy needs and health conditions. The important principle is moderation. You don't need an enormous bowl. You don't need to eat grapes every day. And you certainly don't need a grape-only diet. Use them as one fruit among many, because variety is one of the greatest strengths of a healthy diet. Different fruits provide different combinations of nutrients and plant compounds. So perhaps the better question isn't, how many grapes should I eat? But, how many different plants can I include in my diet over time? That question opens a much bigger door. The final thought: there is something humbling about studying a grape, because the more closely you look, the less simple it becomes. At first, it's just a sweet fruit. Then you discover water, then carbohydrates, then fiber, then vitamins and minerals, then polyphenols, then anthocyanins, then resveratrol, then the microbiome, then cellular signaling, then vascular biology, then the relationship between food and long-term health. And suddenly, the grape is no longer just a grape. It becomes a window into biology, a reminder that the things we casually place on our table can contain levels of complexity far beyond what our eyes can see. And perhaps this is where nutrition becomes something deeper than counting calories. Because food is not merely about filling the stomach. Food connects us to the earth, to agriculture, to sunlight, to water, to biology, and ultimately, to the astonishing systems that sustain life. So the next time you see a bunch of grapes, don't look at them as merely a sweet snack. Look at the color. Look at the skin. Look at the shape. Think about the vine that produced them. Think about the sunlight that fed them. Think about the water drawn through the roots. Think about the thousands of chemical reactions that transformed simple elements into something your body can eat. And remember, you don't need to call a grape a miracle cure to appreciate how extraordinary it is. Sometimes, the deeper truth is more beautiful than the hype. A tiny fruit doesn't have to heal everything. It doesn't have to prevent every disease. It doesn't have to be a miracle. It only has to be what it was created to be. A piece of nourishment, a small gift from the natural world, and perhaps a quiet reminder that creation often hides its greatest complexity inside the simplest things. One grape, one bite, one moment, and an entire world of biology hidden inside.